Today is Monday, July 27th, 2026, and today is National Crème Brûlée Day. Crème brûlée is one of those desserts that's all about contrasts. You spend time making a smooth, delicate custard, and then, right before serving it, you deliberately set the top on fire. Somehow, burning part of your dessert is exactly what makes it better. Humans have always had an interesting relationship with risk. Sometimes we embrace it. Sometimes we try to control it. And sometimes we realize, just a little too late, that maybe a warning label would have been a good idea. Today we'll watch America put its first warning on cigarettes, see an airplane convince the military that flight had finally arrived, and meet a certain Wascally Wabbit who hopped into history without anyone realizing he'd become one of the most recognizable characters on Earth. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and someone increasingly convinced that history is mostly people improvising with confidence. By the mid-1960s, the evidence linking cigarette smoke to lung cancer and other serious diseases had become increasingly difficult to ignore. The landmark Surgeon General's report had been released the previous year, and for the first time, smoking wasn't just being debated as a personal habit, it had become a national public health issue. Cigarette companies had pushed back hard. Smoking was deeply woven into American culture. Celebrities endorsed cigarettes. Doctors had appeared in old advertisements. Television commercials made smoking look sophisticated, relaxing, even healthy. Asking the public to rethink that relationship was no small task. Then, on July 27, 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act into law. Beginning the following year, cigarette packages sold in the United States would carry a simple statement: caution, cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health. Today, those warnings seem almost understated compared to the graphic labels used in many countries. But at the time, it was revolutionary. For the first time, the federal government required manufacturers to warn consumers that a legal product carried serious health risks. The law didn't ban cigarettes. It didn't outlaw advertising. In fact, some critics argued it wasn't strong enough. But it established a principle that has since become almost invisible because we're so accustomed to it. Companies have responsibility to tell consumers about known dangers. Today we see warning labels everywhere, on medications, power tools, ladders, toys, household chemicals, and countless other products, especially in California. It's easy to forget that there had to be a beginning. One sentence on one package helped change the conversation about consumer safety forever. Of course, warning people about danger is one thing. Actually proving that a risky new technology is worth trusting is something else entirely. That challenge belonged to two brothers from Ohio who believed the future wasn't on the ground at all. In the summer of 1909, Orville Wright arrived at Fort Myer, Virginia, determined to convince a skeptical U.S. Army that airplanes weren't just experimental curiosities. They were practical machines with military value. The Army had reason to be cautious. Less than a year earlier, during military trials, a propeller failed and caused a crash that killed Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, making him the first person to die in an airplane accident. Orville himself had been seriously injured. Many wondered whether powered flight was simply too dangerous to be useful. Returning to Fort Myer took courage. On July 27, 1909, Orville climbed back into a Wright military flyer and gave the Army exactly what it had asked for: a demonstration of endurance. For more than an hour, 1 hour, 12 minutes and 40 seconds, the airplane circled above the parade grounds. Crowds watched from below as the fragile-looking machine remained steady in the air, shattering the Army's minimum requirement and proving that powered flight was becoming reliable rather than merely remarkable. The demonstration wasn't flashy by today's standards. The airplane flew slower than most people drive through town. Its wings were fabric. The engine produced only a fraction of the horsepower found in a modern compact car. But everyone watching understood they were seeing something new. Within a few years, airplanes would carry mail. Soon after that, passengers. And eventually, they would reshape commerce, exploration, warfare, and the way people thought about distance itself. Sometimes history changes with a dramatic moment. Sometimes it changes because someone quietly stays in the air for long enough for everyone else to realize the impossible has become practical. The Wright brothers helped prove that an airplane could become something people trusted. A few decades later, another invention would prove something entirely different. Sometimes the ideas that last aren't machines at all. Sometimes they're personalities. By 1940, Warner Brothers had introduced several Rabbit characters, but none of them really connected with audiences. They were energetic enough, but they hadn't yet found that spark that made people remember them. Animators Tex Avery, Bob Givens, and writer Rich Hogan believed they had something better. Instead of another generic cartoon rabbit, they created a character who was completely unbothered by danger. He was smart instead of strong, calm instead of panicked, and no matter how ridiculous the situation became, he always seemed to be one step ahead. Then, on July 27, 1940, audiences watched the cartoon A Wild Hare. It was there that Mel Blanc delivered the line that wasn't even supposed to become legendary. And I wish that I could do a better impersonation, but this is what you get. "What's up, Doc?" The phrase wasn't invented for Bugs Bunny. It was simply everyday slang that director Tex Avery remembered hearing while growing up in Texas. Precisely because it sounded so casual, it made the rabbit seem fearless. Hunters, monsters, and every imaginable threat might be chasing him. But Bugs greeted them as though he had just bumped into a neighbor at the grocery store. Audiences loved it. The cartoon established nearly everything we still associate with Bugs Bunny today. The relaxed confidence, the quick wit, the habit of outsmarting opponents rather than overpowering them, and the mischievous grin that always suggested he already knew how things were going to end. More than 80 years later, Bugs Bunny remains one of the most recognizable animated characters ever created. Not because he was the loudest character on the screen, but because he was usually the calmest. Creating unforgettable characters, though, isn't limited to movies and television. Sometimes the audience gets to become the characters themselves. That idea changed an entire hobby thanks to today's birthday. Gary Gygax was born on July 27, 1938 in Chicago, Illinois. As a kid, he loved adventure stories, history, miniature soldiers, and strategy games. Those interests followed him into adulthood, where he became deeply involved in tabletop wargaming, a hobby that recreated famous battles using miniature figures and detailed rulebooks. But Gygax kept wondering something. What if the game wasn't about commanding an army? What if it was about becoming one person inside the adventure? Working with Dave Arnson, he helped answer that question in 1974 with the publication of Dungeons & Dragons. Instead of simply trying to win, players created heroes with their own strengths, weaknesses, personalities, and backstories. A dungeon master described the world while the players decided what happened next. Every game became a collaborative story that no one, not even the person running it, could predict completely. Today, role-playing games influence far more than tabletop gaming. Their ideas reshaped countless video games, inspired novels, television series, films, and podcasts, and introduced millions of people to imaginative storytelling. And looking back at today, it's interesting how each story built on the last. A warning label represented society learning how to communicate risk. The Wright brothers showed that a remarkable invention could earn people's trust. Bugs Bunny demonstrated the lasting power of a memorable character. And Gary Gygax handed ordinary people the chance to create unforgettable characters of their own. None of these moments were trying to change culture forever. They were simply solving the problem in front of them. Only later did history reveal how much those solutions would matter. Anyway, I'm not sure I'd trust a rabbit flying one of the Wright brothers' airplanes while eating crème brûlée and ignoring a warning label. But if Gary Gygax were running the adventure, I'd probably roll the dice and see what happened. Maybe that's why today's story fits together so naturally. One invention leads to another. One idea inspires the next, and before long, we're somewhere nobody expected to end up. As science fiction author Terry Pratchett once observed, stories of imagination tend to upset those without one. If you'd like to hear more of my narration work, podcasts, or other projects, you can find everything at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and thanks for taking a weird little walk through history with me. I'll see you tomorrow.